wonderful that you were able to spare the time to come and talk to us. I know you've got a very busy schedule here at the conference, and we're really delighted to have you come and chat with us about some of the issues that are confronting publishers. But before we get into the issues, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, especially about your job. What exactly does the chief publishing officer for a international publisher, academic publisher like Brill, what do you do? What's your job responsibilities?
Thanks a lot for having me. It's a good question. What am I doing? Well, we're a 336-year-old publishing house, focusing on the humanities, social sciences, and international law and biology. These are the fields we mainly publish in. And we do so with a staff of around 70 editorial staff. And these 70 people, they produce about, of course, together with our author community, about 1,200 books per year. And we publish around 330 journals, open access, non-open access. And my responsibility is, of course, to give leadership to that group of people that are working very hard and passionate, and to define the publishing strategy, build the program, shape the program, and represent the publishing department, which I would consider to be the heart of a publisher. Represent that publishing department in the management board of Brill. Brill is a publicly listed company, so we have shareholders and a special responsibility as a publicly listed company. We're a medium-sized publisher with around 170 staff in 5 locations. So that's my job. I'm by training I'm a book historian, and have a huge heart not only for academia but of course also for the library community, which I think the library community also has a big heart for topics like book history. And in Germany, where I did my degree and where I grew up, we call it Buchwissenschaft. So it's the science of books, so to say. It's not even book history. It's more than that. Yeah.
Well, let me just follow up. What was it about book history that attracted you so much?
I did my first degree, and that's a good question, because when you go to a party and you tell other people, what are you doing, and you say, I write a PhD in book history, it kind of kills almost any conversation you can have. Or in a very rare moment, it really sparks interest, and you have that evening-long conversation, and you never stop. I did my first degree in business management, which is something completely different to book history, but I started to work for in a bookshop when I was 16. Really, the first moment I was legally allowed to work somewhere. I got a job in a bookshop, and I loved it. Spent all my money I earned in the shop, and then from that on, I really wanted to work with books in the broadest sense of the word, and went on to, during my business management degree, work for a publishing house for a long time, for an educational publisher. And when I was getting to the end of my degree, I was wondering, oh God, what am I doing now? And with this tool I have, business management, which is a useful tool, you can understand how a company operates and how you can bring it forward and what strategy is and finances and all that stuff. But I can't really work on the content. I'd probably end up in some kind of a marketing department. And nothing bad about marketing department, that's probably great to work there. But I really wanted to work in editorial. So I felt I needed to have some kind of a content backup in order to make that possible. And then I looked around and looked for degrees, and then I ended up in this very long PhD program, where I first had to do a degree in book history and literature studies, and then my PhD on media competition. That was my topic. So I was a student for a very long time. I was blessed with having a prolonged scholarship from a foundation, which was fantastic. And my career only really started some 11 years ago, I think, 11 or 12 years ago. And that's when I then got into professional publishing, where I could combine the two hearts in my breast, which is on the one hand the business side of things, which I find very interesting, and on the other hand the content side of things. So, yeah.
That's great. Fascinating. Thank you. As you know, I was fortunate enough to attend the Fiesole retreat this past spring and saw your presentation there as part of a panel that was convened by Ann Okerson on publisher strategies in the open era. It was a fantastic talk. Part of that you discussed Brill Open. So can you tell us a little bit about that aspect of your company?
Yeah. Brill has always been, in a very Dutch way, very pragmatic about all sorts of business models. We've always been very digital. One of the first humanities presses really with a full digital portfolio. And when you look at our digital revenue, it is pretty advanced compared to some other smaller presses. So it was a really natural thing for us to also move into open access. And our open access program is actually 10 years old to date. So not today, but this year. So it is I would say, advanced. We have published some 400 open access books. We have some 25 full open access journals. All our journals are hybrid. So we have gained a lot of experience in the last 10 years with developing that open access program, experimented a lot, and done Knowledge Unlatched. We've set up mega journals. We have flipped journals from subscription to open access and flipped them back. We have what some people would call today a transformative agreement. Maybe it's just an old school offsetting deal, but it is a deal. So we have all sorts of experimented with all sorts of models, but are now 10 years after creating and launching that open access program in a situation where we think it is going from being really small business to being a serious part of our publishing and our business strategy.
Do you see OA expanding in Brill's future?
I think it needs to expand. We are, at this point, as I said, we are at a sort of a point where we think we can accelerate things with initiatives like Planus, more awareness also in the US about a gold way for open access. I think we are in a situation where we can significantly increase the proportion of open access content within our portfolio. We are at the moment at about a level of about 8% of article output which is published in open access. That's, for a humanities press, that's not bad at all. That's kind of okay. But when you compare it to the sciences and to the big competitors in the sciences, where the open access ratio or the proportion is at about 20 to 30%, it is clear that there is what I would call an openness gap between us as a humanities publisher and other publishers that mainly have STM content. And that openness gap is something that concerns me a lot. We could carry on doing the same stuff that we have always done, selling subscriptions to institutions, building up small subscription base and funding journals through that route. And that still works in a way, but it would mean that the articles that are published with us, mainly humanities content, have less visibility than those that are published in open access. At some point they will have less impact, and that at the end of the day also means that they potentially have a poor funding situation, which is possibly a vicious cycle for the the fields that are already under pressure in many ways. So I'm concerned about this, we're concerned about this, and we think we can offer the best possible service if we broaden up that scholarship and if we disseminate it much more broadly. And the humanities content that we publish is something that also leans itself to being disseminated more broadly. It is content that people also outside of academia, at least part of it, would be interested in reading and consuming, policymakers, interested citizens, and they could even understand the content we are publishing. You know, it is usually written in a way that is where you can read it, and there is less specialist language used compared to the sciences. So I think it will, and it definitely also should, increase.
Thank you. And that really segues nicely into my next question that I had. You also talked to Fiesley about an HSS perspective on Planus. That was part of your talk there. So how are, for those of us not aware, how are humanities and social sciences publishers fundamentally different, and how should they be included in Planus or other open access agreements?
When Planus popped up in the discussions sometime last year in May, that was the first time I heard about it, or maybe in April, and also that was the moment when I had the first discussion with people from Coalition S about the situation in the humanities. I felt very much this is not going to work for the communities that we are serving, because the communities we serve, they do not have as much research grant funding as the STM fields, the STEM fields, where the APC model is actually working to a certain extent. There are a number of very successfully run full open access journals with an APC model. This model in the humanities is, there are some outlets, but very few of them. It's not a model that is very well established, but that's simply due to the fact, not because publishers would be more conservative or those fields would be more conservative. It's simply down to the fact because there's not that much funding available. The funding for the journals that we publish is in the subscription money. It is with the library, and it is not necessarily with the research funder. So I felt, you know, okay, we have some articles that are published with funding from Coalition S, maybe about 5% of our output. What are we going to do with those 5% of journals? Are we going to set up some kind of mirror journals or extra outlets? But does that make sense to carve them out of the regular corpus that we publish? How does this work with with all the articles that are being published in the humanities that are not research output? They will then remain in the traditional journals. Then in the humanities, of course, you have a lot more local language publishing, where it would be even more difficult to have that kind of an APC model. So the initial guidelines were very much targeted on that APC model, and also written from a perspective of the sciences, I think. The guidelines, as they were developed at a later stage, took into consideration other forms of openness, which I think was a good thing. The guidelines were reviewed also in light of the CC license, for example. In the humanities, authors are much more concerned about their text being used and changed and maybe translated and deconstructed as it is in the sciences. So a CC BY ND and C license is something that many authors really prefer. Then the green route was opened up in Coalition S. So what you can actually do as an author, you can still publish in the hybrid journal, in that small community that you're used to, but you deposit an author manuscript in a repository, probably a funder repository. So we would not have to split up those articles in those communities and create artificial new ones. And of course, transformative agreements were added to that entire, to the different ways of becoming open or being compliant with Planus, which was a helpful move, not necessarily for the very many small publishers that are part of the humanities community. And that's maybe the last final difference, that in the humanities there is really a long tail of publishers that is serving that community, and that long tail is very specialized and also quite high quality, I would say, something that we not necessarily want to lose. So if you open up routes, you have to make sure that you open up routes also for this long tail of academic publishers.
Your discussion of APC models and hybrid models and transformative agreements dovetails nicely into my next question. And on Tuesday morning, you presented at a pre-conference, and I believe it was entitled "Chaos or Complexity: Transforming Publishing Models in the Planus Era." And I was wondering, among the models that were discussed, which ones do you think hold the most promise, and are there those that you view as being particularly sustainable?
The green route, although it is for us probably like a short-term fix for Planus compliance and compliance with other similar mandates, for me definitely is not the sustainable route. We see already initiatives in the Netherlands, for example. We have an initiative where there is a national open science platform being built up, where the repositories of the 11 universities work together to get all the content that is published in a green version on that repository. We have ResearchGate and Sci-Hub and all those kinds of platforms that create leakage of usage. And I just was coming from our library advisory board meeting where our librarians were telling us how important usage is for them in order to make an acquisition decision. So while I cannot prove, and nobody can prove, that green open access is leading to a decrease in subscriptions, it is, for my logical mind, on the long term, if we have repositories getting interconnected and communicating better with each other, and there are other initiatives in Germany. There is Deep Green, for example, another bigger repository. It is, for me, logical that usage will leak, and that will have an impact on the subscription which is ultimately funding that green open access route. And that's kind of cannibalizing, and so for me, not the sustainable way. What we have discussed at the session yesterday morning were quite a huge variety of, like a bunch of flowers, a huge variety of models that are available, and it is sometimes challenging for a smaller partner and probably also for the library to make up their mind and understand all those different models. I think for our communities, we will always have to have a variety of routes to achieve more openness. There will not be the one ultimate model that will work. So there will be some hybrid APC publishing, some full open access, sponsored, platinum, diamond publishing. Subscribe to Open is an interesting model that people are experimenting with, which is basically crowdfunding among libraries. So all those kinds of crowdfunding models, Subscribe to Open, Knowledge Enlarged, Open Library of Humanities, that's interesting, but I do not think it will be immensely scalable. It will be interesting for a small group of journals, but not for a huge package like that of Brill. There is one model which I think is particularly promising, and I'm not saying anything new or surprising, and that's the transformative deal. And I've just said that smaller publishers have not really had access to those kinds of agreements in the past. We were really at the very end of the discussion of the chain, and libraries didn't really want to talk to us. So that is something that I would say Planus has changed in the last year. There is a lot more awareness that those kinds of deals could be an opportunity, particularly for underfunded fields like the humanities, to move into a more open era. And we've received a lot more interest than we did in the past. And that is something that that I think could be sustainable on the long term, because it is basically the model that we already have, but it's looking at the entire process in a different way. So yeah, this would be my that would be my best guess. But that being said, there will always be a variety of models that we will have to use.
I tend to agree with you. I think that there's not one silver or magic bullet that's going to solve all the problems. It's just not going to happen.
No
And
one size fits all.
Yeah, and it's also in the name transformative agreement. It will transform things, and the agreement itself and the model self will transform into something, and we do not really know what it will be. You could say that's kind of scary and then completely stay away from it, but I do not really think that we have a choice.
No, I don't think that's viable. You've got to figure out the market. That's the way the market's going.
Yeah.
So on the flip side of that discussion, what would you see as the chief impediments or roadblocks to the expansion or expanded adoption of open access publishing? What are holding things back?
Yeah, the complexity of things. I wouldn't say it's chaos. I mean, that has a bit of a panic aspect to me, which I don't feel in our community whatsoever. People are very considerate, are very value the processes we have, value the systems we have. We are all academics, librarians, publishers. You could say we're slow moving, but we are also thoughtful. That's why so many years after the invention of the web, so many years after the invention of social media, we are still around. And it's not that authors are putting everything online, just a PDF. No, they really appreciate the selection and valorization and the communities we're building. And they appreciate also the services of the libraries to curate content and to provide access and to provide guidance in finding the right kind of content. So we're, we're really a slow-moving community that gives us the opportunity to really think about it. And while it is complex, it is not chaotic. So, it will be really interesting to see where we are going in the future, how institutions, what their priorities will be in terms of where they are putting their money. It will also be interesting to see how consortia are developing and redefining their role in this open era. Do they want to really focus on serving the needs of their individual members, or do they have the goal of achieving more full, immediate open access? In the Netherlands, where I come from, the consortia, the national consortia, has really focused on the latter already a number of years ago. It's a very small country. It's a very homogeneous country, so that's something completely different to the United States. But it shows that in this very small nutshell that it can be very successful if you as a consortia redefine your role. The Netherlands is probably one of the most successful countries in terms of openness. They are now at more than 50% open access content, and I'm pretty sure within the next month that percentage will get even higher. You know, that is something I think we all have to just watch and learn from each other, and try to do it in a cooperative way. That was what I took from the morning session, the morning keynotes, that really cooperation and listening to each other and redefining your role and looking at what are really the needs of the patrons. That is something that we will have to do in the next years.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's exciting in a lot of ways to think of all the change that we're going to be confronting, and just be, hopefully we'll do it in a productive fashion, and it'll all go well. I wanted to get back to talk a little bit about the pre-conference, and I was wondering, what were your biggest takeaways from the other presenters?
I mean, for me, this is my first ever Charleston Library Conference, and while I have traveled in the States, and you know, the U.S. is for us our biggest author base outside Europe, it is also our biggest customer base. And I would say I'm pretty familiar with this market from a publishing perspective. For me, the takeaway was really this particular complexity of the U.S. market, with all those consortia, overlapping consortia, very different kind of schools, the small colleges, the state-funded ones, the private ones, the big research institutions that are all mixed up. Yeah, that is, as I just said, it's something very different to Europe, and that's probably also the reason why Europe is advanced, because the complexity here is just much bigger. So it's great to see that some institutions and consortia are taking a leadership role, like MIT, like in the University of California, developing frameworks that help other institutions that are not as progressed to make up their mind, really, and to learn and to share that experience. I think that's really helpful. So for me, that you kind of know it, that it's more complex and it's different, but really listening to everybody, listening to the librarians in the room, that was tremendously valuable for me.
Well, that's one of the great things about the conference. You meet a lot of people as publishers, vendors, librarians, and you get a chance to interchange ideas, which is really a good thing for all of us, I think. Before we let you go, let me ask you one last question to make sure that we haven't missed anything. And I was wondering, if you were sitting in Leah's chair or if you were sitting in my chair, what question would you ask yourself?
Oh, that's a what question would I ask myself? I think the question, how, as a publisher, how do you see yourself as a publisher in 5 years from now?
Well, feel free.
Maybe let's say 5 to 10 years,
okay,
to give it a bit of a broader perspective.
That sounds great. Well, feel free to answer. Well, how do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
I am asking this question myself quite often, as you can imagine. That's
sure.
part of my job.
Of course.
It's a very hard question.
Yeah.
I've just come from the Scholarly Kitchen panel, where we also talked about platforms like ResearchGate that might, some people say, replace publishers in the long term. Not so sure about that, actually, because ResearchGate, Facebook, Mendeley, all those kinds of platforms have been around for quite a long time now. And this very loyal group of researchers and librarians is still working with us and is still looking for those communities that we have built over the last 300 years. So I do think that there is I'm not a huge fan of the term disruption. I think there is a lot of change, and I think there is a lot of opportunity. We as a publisher have to ask ourselves, what is our role in that new scholarly communications world, which is mainly online? What is our role in a world where everyone can put information online and consume information online? And that very old school role of being the gatekeeper on the one hand, selecting content carefully, building a program, building communities, building a brand where people understand this is the community I belong to, is a tremendously important one. That entire process, the peer review, the making sure that content is vetted, that it gets the stamp. So being very careful with what kind of content you take on board, being very strict with your policies, peer review policies, that is something that we will still be doing in maybe very different ways, maybe in an open peer review way, in a more transparent way, in a quicker way, with different kinds of platforms and technologies, but fundamentally it will still be that gatekeeper role. And then as a next step, and that is something that as a smaller publisher that is very natural to us, being that place where authors have a smooth publication experience, where they don't have to worry about all the different steps in the publication process. So as soon as they are accepted, we can offer that smooth process and make sure that the manuscript that they are delivering to us leaves the publishing house in the best possible shape and form, and is then distributed as widely as possible, preferably in an open access way. So the fundamental role of gatekeeper and service provider after the gatekeeping. So I'm not a huge fan of calling myself a service provider. I think we're a gatekeeper that provides a service after manuscript has been accepted. That fundamental role, I think, will not necessarily change, but it will be, from a technological point of view, a very different one. And that means that we have to hire different kinds of people, be open about technology, look at solutions that are different to the solutions we have now. And it also means that we have to continue working in a very, very collaborative way with librarians and with researchers to preserve that selection and quality control aspect that I think we all really value as a community. Just in the panel where I was sitting in the scholarly kitchen panel, someone was saying that the biggest fear is that the entire publication process is pushed really down to the individual, where the individual is just pushing a PDF somewhere on a platform, and that's it. I don't think that, at least that's not where I would hope that scholarly communication is developing towards.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you're on target. Jasmin, thank you so much for coming up here and chatting with us. I can speak for myself, so I really enjoyed talking to you. I learned an awful lot.
Likewise, and thank you for being here. I'm so glad that you're able to attend your first Charleston conference.
Thank you. It's a wonderful conference, and I hope to be back next year. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you so much.